Okay, that's official. All right. Well, welcome everybody to our December Fireside Chat. I'm Kirk Hansen, the Director of Forestry for the Northwest Natural Resource Group. If you are new to attending our Fireside Chats, we host these every month, and it's on a different topic relating to small woodlands management. And we've been doing these now for several years. If you're interested in looking at an archive of some of our past fireside chats, we post all of them to our YouTube channel, and that's the Northwest Natural Resource Group. And I think we have about 3 or 4 years now of fireside chats, again, covering a tremendous range of topics. And for most of our fireside chats, we have a guest speaker come in and talk about the topic of interest. And the way that our chats work, it's just an hour long. The first half hour will be our guest speaker talking about the topic of interest. And then the second half hour is just an open discussion. Folks can ask questions, share anecdotes from your own woodlands, and we try to make it a little more interactive. Either way, this is a super informal event, and we've been having a lot of fun hosting these. So tonight, I'm really pleased to host Elliott Church. Elliott is the Municipal Arborist for the University of Washington and has spent, at least the past 10 years or so researching English holly. And Elliot and I had a great conversation last week about this pernicious invasive species. And I'm really excited to get his perspective on it. He's going to share some of his research, talk about the presence of holly in the Pacific Northwest and its impacts on our forests. And I think before I turn the talking stick over to you, Elliot, I'm just going to share just a quick perspective from my work as a forester. I work all over the west side of the Cascades, and I've noticed in particular in the past 10 years that nearly every, I would say probably more than 80% of the forests that I work in, I'm now seeing holly beginning to pop up in the understory. My family owns 200 acres of woodlands in King County, Thurston County, Grays Harbor County. All three of our forests have holly now. And every time I go out, I'm finding anything from small seedlings coming up to, if I've missed them for a couple of years, small saplings. So this has become a very ubiquitous invasive species in my line of work. And I'm really curious, since Elliott has been doing this kind of research at a regional level now, to hear from him what he's seeing. So with that as an introduction, Elliott, I want to turn it over to you and thank you again for joining us. And what can you share with us about your work with English holly?
Hey, Kirk, thanks so much. Yeah, I have. So first off, I want to say, luckily for me, we're sticking with an informal theme here. I'm warning folks, I had quite a heck of a time here with my technology, so bear with me. Got a new computer and everything. Um, there's a guy, Al Smith, that wrote a great article about the conservationist, quote unquote conservationist, the gal who formed a society in the 20s and planted holly all over the state. I saw him give a presentation when I went to go give him the remote to control the PowerPoint. He was like, "I don't use technology." I'm starting to feel like I understand him more and more. But anyways, there's a lot to say about holly, and we don't have a whole lot of time. So I'm gonna do my best to go over some basics about the plant, share some of my research, a little bit of some tidbits, and you know, hopefully for entertainment value, we might do a live experiment on the show. There's been some talk about holly being a potential ladder fuel out there, and that it burns when it's green. So that fire back there is not just for, living up to the name of the talk. I do have a holly stem that I harvested yesterday, so it is green. And stick around till the end. I'm going to throw it on the fire. We'll see what happens. So, I did do this in the summer, and it lit right up for what it's worth. So the experiment here today is, after all this atmospheric river, if this guy's going to light up or not. So, anyways, okay. So yeah, I'll just jump right into it here. And Kirk, feel free to butt in, redirect me, anything you want to say. I'm gonna just try to open up my slides here. I have some slides. I'll talk at you, and some pictures to share. So I warned Kirk I'm not a Zoom wizard. So while I'm loading it up, I will share a little bit about me. I am a municipal arborist. It is for a city in a mid-sized city in Western Washington. I went to the UW. Minor correction there. Sorry, I didn't catch it earlier, Kirk. I went to the UW Bothell Extension Campus, and I went from 2012 to 2011 to 2013. I did my I studied conservation restoration ecology. I double majored in global studies, and met Dr. David Stokes there, worked on a couple holly projects. Those turned into publications. I'll briefly cover those a little bit. And went on to work on my master's thesis, looking at holly in a timber managed forest. It was the UW's experimental forest, pack forest in Eatonville. I'll cover that. I'll cover that briefly. I worked. I went to work from there as an arborist, and doing restoration work, doing arborist work for a city, mainly street trees. So it says I'm screen sharing. Kirk, do you see the presentation?
I do. Yep. It's yep, there you go.
Do you see a big white box?
I see a big white box.
Okay, well. You might see me drop kick my computer. Looks like I'm gonna have to do it this way. Is that all right?
You bet. I'd say whatever works.
Okay, yeah, at this point. Sorry folks, it's a new computer, and this was working for me a little bit ago, so I don't know what happened. So yeah. Well, I told you a little bit about my history. I have some personal connections to holly. Doing my due diligence, I went to England past summer, visited the native range. I have a sister there, and a couple nephews. Looked around to Arundel Castle for holly. Found a couple nice specimens. Didn't make it to Dorking. That'll be next trip. Here's a picture from Pack Forest of me next to the largest holly I found out there. I don't know if you can see me towards the bottom. That is a gosh, 40 footer or so, 50 footer maybe. Oldest holly I came across in that stand. Um, yeah, and this is the reason I'm assuming we're all here. Um, holly's a pretty remarkable plant, has a pretty significant place in our culture. And unfortunately, a pretty significant place more and more in our forests, right? Um, Kirk mentioned he sees it just about everywhere. Um, and and that's the reason why some of us got started researching holly about, well, I guess getting to be 13, 15 years ago now. So let me see here. Let me see if I can make this work, Kirk. I was thinking about a pop culture reference recently that has some significance to me. When I was a kid, one of our rituals was to watch The Nightmare Before Christmas every Christmas until the VCR ate our tape. But I think that's a fitting analogy these days. Here's Jack Skellington reading The Scientific Method and putting holly berries before under the microscope. Maybe this, maybe this subconsciously steered me towards this type of work. Probably, safe to say. And then, there's other references too. More recently, I've been reading Dante's Inferno, speaking of the flammability of holly. And I can't help think of the case of holly in our region. Even the first line, I think about when we visited the Lake Young's reserve, where that's kind of the worst case scenario. Well, yeah, worst case scenario that we have in mind when we think about where holly can go in our region. Really dense thickets underneath the Douglas firs. Made me think of the line, I went astray from the straight road and woke to find myself alone in a dark wood. How shall I say, what a wood that was? I never saw so drear, so rank, so arduous a wilderness. Its very memory gives a shape to fear. Maybe a more fitting line would be, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Probably the most famous one. But not to get too dramatic, feels that way sometimes. But let's just cover some of the basics for those of y'all who might not be familiar with the plant. I feel like that's probably pretty unlikely, but I'll just go over it real quick anyways. English holly, Ilex aquifolium. The L's for Linnaeus, described by Carolus Linnaeus. It's an evergreen shrub to small tree. That is has been identified by researchers as a kind of a novel element in our forest, to have this sort of sub canopy tree that's persistently evergreen in the underneath, in between our towering overstory trees and our shrub layer in our typical native forests. It's dioecious, which means it has male and female plants. Bright red berries that are typically dispersed by birds. That accounts for its long distance spread. The native range of holly is northwest, central to southern Europe, North Africa, into Southwest Asia. It's maybe a little bigger range than some folks might realize. And then something that might have implications for where we expect it to get in our region is that lower temperatures seem to limit the range of holly. It doesn't handle prolonged frost well, and it seems to need a certain a minimum level of heat in the summer to set fruit. So that's something that would be interesting to study more. in our moving forward in our region. Um, the Some other interesting things about this plant. I mean, holly's pretty remarkable, and I think it's a very vigorous sprouter, which I'm sure some of you have experienced firsthand or seen. Um, this helps it survive through clear cutting operations. I found in my master's thesis work. Um, uh, in its native range, it withstands heavy browsing pressure, which keeps it at a sort of low scrub level in a lot of places. Um, and it can also form pier stands in its native range. Um, and you'll find there's reports of like animals creating tunnels through there and seeking shelter. Um, and that's kind of the picture we have in mind when we think of what is the possibility for holly moving forward. Why does it make us concerned? Um, just a little factoid. It used to be thought to be more abundant and common as a taller tree in especially England and Ireland. Um, Many uses: woodworking, timber, decoration, significance for festivals. The Romans used it. There's plenty of examples out there you can find. Um, and then it has a long history of being cultivated in our region. Here's the North Bend Bybee Holly Farm. I swung by to get some shots. It's no longer active. This is right next to where I did my master's research in Eatonville, the Holly Hut, just sort of just showing you an example of the presence and that it has, culturally and I don't know if they have this anymore. We went and talked to these folks. They said there's an older gal, and we didn't pass up the chance to go in and talk to her. And I believe she said that her family used to have a farm. I think she just said out in the mountains somewhere, and who knows what it's doing these days. Maybe the trees are still there, but now I had a slide for this, but some of the technical difficulties washed it away. But I want to talk about how we got here. One of the ways we got here, there's a great article in the Glacia, winter 2013, about a socialite, I guess you could call her that, a high society person, well connected. That this is my paper. This isn't it. Set up a organization along with the dean of College of Forestry at the UW at the time, Winkenwerder, and this comes from that article by Al Smith I mentioned earlier. Utilizing Girl Scouts, volunteers, planted thousands and thousands of holly around the region with the goal of making Washington the holly state. And you could say they succeeded. Unfortunately, we're always going to be dealing with it at this point. But going back to Dante, I wonder what circle of hell conservationists today might assign those to. I was proud of myself. I had a couple cutouts of their faces along with a holly sprig in the pits here, but oh well. Anyways, moving on. So yeah, that's a little background. This is a list of the work that I've done. Like I said, I started out with Dr. Stokes doing a research project looking at the population of holly in a St. Edward State Park, in a subset of St. Edward State Park, and the goal was to characterize the course of the invasion. At the time, there was an attempt to list holly. The articles that Kirk linked in the description for tonight's event, they do a great job of covering that history. There was an attempt to list holly. It failed due to a lot of counter lobbying by the growing industry that's here in Washington. But one of the reasons was there wasn't a lot of scientific data that proved that holly was invasive. basically this data conclusively showed that it arrived in the park, spread naturally at a close to exponential rate. So that paper, that's out there if you Google it. By the way, if you want to read any of these further, just email me. I'll have my email at the end of the talk. I'd be happy to share. So I moved from there. I moved on to do my master's thesis. We wanted to look at holly in a managed forest and ask some questions about forest management related to holly invasion. I think we got at some of it. And more recently, I published some data related to the reduction of native vegetation cover under holly canopy. And that's the most recent paper, and that's listed, the third one listed there. And I'll cover the thesis and my research paper a little bit here for you. So flipping the order here, this is the first project I was doing in terms of data collection. It was the most recent one published, but the title of the paper is Non-Native English Holly Associated with Reduced Cover and Diversity of Common Native Forest Understory Plant Species. Just going over quickly going over the study. I looked at a subset of native plant species, mainly woody perennials and evergreen plants underneath and adjacent to holly canopy. My data showed that native vegetation cover was greatly reduced under holly canopy, about 71% lower on average. And native vegetation diversity was 48% lower. That's an index, the Shannon-Weiner index. This is the basic methodology structure. If you're interested in that, I basically put plots underneath the holly canopy on a north-south transect. They're paired so that you have one underneath and outside of the holly canopy on the south, with the one to the south being the control, and one underneath and outside to the north. The reason we did it this way is that we hope to capture a hypothesized shade effect, which we did find a lower cover value on the north plot compared to the control plot. This is just a couple figures from the study. So just quickly, these are those plots, the total percent cover of native vegetation. With the right one, looking at the plot on the left, the box plot on the right is your control. No, I'm sorry, flipping it around. Looking on the left, the box plot on the left, that's your control plot. Moving underneath the holly, if you imagine the holly's right over these two plots right here. And then the plot to the north of the tree in the shade of the holly. And then the plot on the right shows both plots outside the holly averaged, and then both plots underneath the holly averaged for total cover of native vegetation. So this just shows, what this is showing is that there was a consistent reduction across all the trees. It varied in magnitude, but all trees went from higher outside, lower underneath on average. And if you want more details on that, feel free to ask me for the paper or punch it up on Google. Real quick, I'll cover my thesis. One moment. Live communique here. That might be technical assistance. Okay. Disregard. So my master's thesis was conducted at Pack Forest in which is the UW's experimental forest in Eatonville, which has there's a lot of experimental work going on there. It's more of a patchwork of forest management units compared to a more commercial managed forest environment. So it's smaller harvest unit sizes. But there's a lot of your typical treatments are found out there. So and there's a lot of holly out there. So it was a perfect spot to do some research. And interestingly enough, no fault of theirs, I'm not blaming them, but the folks who manage it didn't really think that we'd find holly when we approached them and said that we'd want to do some research on holly out there. They didn't think we'd find much. And the ecological survey of Pack Forest from 2006, their assessment of invasive plants, when their write-up said that they didn't mention holly, and they or if it did, it might have been very minor. I don't remember off the top of my head, but they did for sure mention that invasive plants, the invasive plant issue for Pack was, like, in their words, like most places, an issue of disturbed open sites. And that speaks to kind of the concern with holly, at least until recently, which was that it's part of a class of invaders that are shade tolerant and can invade closed canopy forest, which generally is considered more resistant because a lot of invasive species are pioneer species. They're shade intolerant species. And so a combination of that shade tolerance and relative to those pioneer species, a slightly, a relatively slower growth rate, at least when you compare it to pioneer species, made it a little more, it slipped under people's radar a little more. Not so much the case now, but they had that lag phase where it was just sort of building up to that sort of threshold where it would start ramping into that exponential growth phase. So anyways, I if I get off on too much of a tangent, holler at me, Kirk. But what I want to do is compare holly in recent clear cuts within the last 10 years and mature, quote unquote, mature forested stands. And there was several that bordered each other that had holly. And what I was interested in, you can't get to everything you're interested in a research project, but I was able to get some interesting data. And I wanted to get a sense of, like, was there an edge effect related to growth rate, related to abundance? How did it compare in the clear cut where it's highlight harsh environment? Maybe there's some damage from clear cut operations. How was it doing in the clear cut versus the shaded mature stand? And basically what I found, related to those questions, was, we had plenty of holly in the clear cuts. They were generally more vigorous, more berries, more fruits. It was present across pretty much all age classes. You had some holly present in just about every age class of stand out there. Even the really dense, like, canopy closure, competitive exclusion stands. And I also found that when I did a cross-section analysis, I looked at basal area increment. I basically looked at how much the trees grew and increased their size of growth ring before and after the harvest. And there was, like, a release effect in the holly there was a lot of holly that were present before the harvest, and they persisted through the harvest. And there was a release effect, like they blew up in terms of their growth rate. Right. So basically, as far as your audience goes in this group, it goes to show that if you do a harvest without controlling holly first, you might have a release and a ramping up of holly fruit production and growth, right? So if you're sorry, I don't know if people can see this, let me know, but this is an example of one of those trees. This is a cross section of one of the trees in the clear cut. So I apologies if this is hard to see, but here is the pith, the center of the sample, and from here to where this point is here, this marks the date of the year prior to the harvest. Okay. And the growth rings are much tighter. So for like, if you can follow my mouse, maybe I can zoom in here. Maybe that'll help. See, I'm not so bad at technology after all, right? So here from here to here, here's a growth ring, right? But post harvest, you're looking from here to here to here to here, right? And I have this quantified. I measured this, so this is quantified in the thesis. I don't want to go too slowly here, Kirk, or I don't want to make too slow progress here, Kirk. So let me know if I should move along here. But so going back to whether or not holly persists through clear cutting operations, this is actually, I have some examples of this from PAC that I couldn't dig up, but luckily I had some from Tiger Mountain. This is a harvest unit near Tiger Mountain in a clear cut, and you can see some previous damage. And this is out in the open, full sun. You can see some previous damage that the holly overcame, grew around, no problem, right? So I think what's remarkable about holly is its tenacity, and also its unless you're talking about cold or real wet environments, ability to just grow in deep shade to hot full sun. So talking about, oops, I don't want to get ahead of myself here real quick. So talking about impacts, right? I mean, basically, people were observing this, but what the question was when I did my research on impacts was, what's the size of the impact? How consistent is the impact? And the answer was, I mean, at least what my data, based on my data, it was a sizable, substantial impact in terms of reduction of cover of native species that was consistent across every tree I sampled, right? And that the concerns that brings up is we don't know the density limitation of holly in our forests, right? We're seeing some pretty dense accumulations like at Lake Young's. It's possible that there is a limiting density that may not be what it is in its native range. But, if you look at the native range of holly, it forms pure stands, right? And if you're not trying to grow, unless you're trying to grow holly, and there's some people that are doing that, it's going to be a problem because it's suppressing everything else underneath it, right? So if you're concerned about native biodiversity, if you're concerned about native forest communities or native species that you're managing for their product, the products associated with them for the ecological benefits, it's very concerning. And it's, as Kirk has noticed, and a lot of you notice, it's pretty much, it's hard to find a green belt that doesn't have a holly in it at this point. So unfortunately, we're at a point where it's, you know, it's management and trying to mitigate, right? It's going to be with us. But at this point, we're trying to mitigate. So something else that's come up recently, I mentioned this earlier. I've seen the King County wildfire risk reduction strategy document from a couple years ago had this interesting statement, and I haven't seen more on this, but if this, I mean, this was included in the document. English holly is a flammable thicket forming understory shrub, which can function as a ladder fuel. It comes from that, the stature of holly relative to other native trees, right? Being that sort of subcanopy small tree. And how about this for, you know, sort of inferno-esque picture? This is from the Royal Botanic Gardens. Oils found in the thick skin of holly leaves produce a flammable vapor when heated, which causes them to ignite easily. Yeah, there's not a source for this, but like I said, we're gonna do a little citizen science tonight, okay? We're gonna, and I should say don't try this at home, but let us know what you find, maybe in your own experience. But real quick, I'll just go through some other examples of holly density that I've seen. This is probably the worst I've seen outside of Lake Young's. There's this park called Ladowood Park in Bellevue. That's wall to wall. Okay. And here's some older holly, probably the source holly in this site. In the foreground of this photo, there's these are trees that were injected and had died back. And in the background, there are trees that hadn't been injected yet. But you can see underneath here, there's not a whole lot growing there. Related to that point, you got a site like that, you don't want to be, you know, you didn't have it on your list of things to do, you know, have a holly farm, and you want to get rid of it. This is what it cost. Excuse me. This is what it cost the city over 5 years for 2.3 acres. Okay, 80,000. Okay, so we'll get into control here, but this, if there ever was a plant where you want to find it early and pull it out when you can just pull it out, it's holly, right? Classic example of early detection and rapid response. Okay, so before I jump into control real quick, any questions, Kirk? You got anything?
No, I think we'll save the questions till you're done here. And yeah, I don't want to cut you short, but if
I'll blast through the rest. That was a simple rule.
5 minutes, and then yeah, I'd love to have people pepper you with questions.
Sounds good. That was a simple ruse to take a sip of beer. Let me see. So I will say control. There's there's good resources out there. King County has great write-ups. Pacific Northwest Weed Handbook has great write-ups. My experience has been mechanical control, and I am a licensed herbicide applicator. I'm licensed to apply restricted herbicides. So I'm maybe not the best resource for getting creative, but there is some stuff out there. So like I said, you want to find holly, you want to uproot it when it's small, and you can do it. It doesn't get very big before that becomes a real chore. And you have to consider, if you're squeamish about herbicides, or maybe squeamish isn't the right word, you know, you don't want to use herbicides for whatever reason. Um, I would say keep in mind the impact to the soil if you're going to be trying to mechanically remove it. I've heard stories of people getting backhoes out there and digging craters, and at a certain extent, at a certain point, you got to judge like, is that worth it? To avoid herbicide use. Um, Easy Eject, it's the Lance, is the most efficient by far to control holly at a larger scale, which doesn't get to be that much before it becomes pretty cost effective, right? And that is the lance that uses the 22 shells with an imazapyr gel that you inject into the holly. What's nice about it is that it's a more targeted application. There's less off-target impacts, except for if you have plants that are grafted onto roots in some cases. But compared to like an aerial spray, in my opinion, I think it's a much it's more effective, but it's also less messy. I have seen repeated cutting work. A good example is the house where I grew up. We had a big holly tree in the front yard my whole childhood. We decided to cut it down at one point. And it took many years, but we basically kept cutting the suckers, and eventually it gave up. But that was a long process. My mom might be able to remind me. She might be on the presentation, but that's some of these methods like covering, which is possible, repeated mowing or cutting. They're only really going to be effective if you have trees that you can revisit often. Okay. In interest of time, moving along, I mentioned the resources. Okay, let's talk about further questions. I gotta add the log of the fire of the big experiment. It's not gonna work out here. I just want to throw this out there because there's some things that folks out there who are interested, they can start looking at and maybe start gathering some information on. There's simple questions that pretty much anybody can do. And then there's more involved stuff that would be more for students who are working in labs or working with professors at a college. But I just thought I'd share. Holly's an evergreen. We have evergreen dominance in this region of the world because we have moderate winters, and they can photosynthesize during the winter time. That's one of the reasons. There's a classic paper on this. It would be interesting to see to what extent holly is able to take advantage of that. And a hypothesis might be, does holly grow faster in a deciduous forest because maybe it can take advantage of winter photosynthesis as opposed to an evergreen forest. If you don't want to use herbicide and you want to slow down holly spread, cutting female trees that are producing berries, you're going to get suckers you have to deal with. But so far, from what I've heard from talking to at least one source over at Cedar River, we cut a female holly down that was quite mature, and that was a couple of years ago. Haven't seen berries on the sprouts, so that could slow things down possibly. But that's like could be a further research project. Mortality is an interesting question. The mortality rates, there's seems to be pretty low mortality rates in the populations we've studied. The success of seed germination, different habitats, how the dispersers of holly behave, say relative to forest management prescriptions. If there's more edge environment created or not, how might that influence holly dispersal, spatial dynamics. On a more accessible level, if you haven't heard of iNaturalist, I would check it out. It's a phone app and a website where you can log observations of anything really. But there's a lot of observations of holly on there. Some researchers of holly are on there and post things. And if you see holly out in the wilderness and you are able to use this app, I would encourage you to log it and include as much information as you can about the site characteristics. And if you can't identify the sex of the tree, that would be awesome. This is an example of the observation map for English holly on iNaturalist currently. This is from today. And I think the limitation of cold on distribution and probably is borne out by the fact that you don't see it that much in Eastern Washington. And then, yeah, lots more I could say, but that's my email. If you want to ask me, if you want to get a hold of any of my publications or ask me any further questions that we don't cover in the Q&A period tonight. So, Kirk, I'll throw it to you. I'm going to throw another log or two on this fire real quick.
All right. Sounds good. Yeah, thanks, Elliott. So a few questions have come in through the chat, and I think we'll start with those first, and then open it up for folks to ask questions live of you. And if you can hear me while you're stoking your fire,
I can. Yes, I can. Yes.
Awesome. So the first question is, let's see here. Is holly just so dense itself, or does it have allelopathic characteristics? I was kind of wondering that myself. And for those folks that aren't familiar with the term allelopathic, that typically refers to a root chemical that is exuded that inhibits the growth of other plants around the plant that is exuding the allelopathic chemical. So do you know if any studies have been done of allelopathic effects of holly?
Yes. And you know what? I might be able to quickly find them, but off the top of my head, there is the only, okay, so I think the only one I'm aware of is an undergraduate research publication. So it's not necessarily a, peer-reviewed article, sort of level of research. Basically, long story short, the mechanisms are still a area that needs more thorough investigation. So the mechanisms behind which holly is, native plants are reduced directly under holly canopy. That's an area that needs more work to definitively say. And I think that it'd be very interesting. There's lots of different, it doesn't have to be one thing, right? And oftentimes it isn't. As far as allelopathy goes, allelopathy can cover different things too, right? It's not just a chemical. It could be, it could be like a chemical that's harmful. It could also be a change in soil chemistry, in my understanding. So, something I wanted to do when I was doing my effects research was get light meter readings under the holly to be able to more definitively say something about light reduction and shade. As anyone who's tried to do any field work or research knows, you can't do everything on your wish list for practical reasons. But I think that you can reasonably infer that there is absolutely a shade effect. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's some form of allelopathy, but it could also be root competition. It could be the litter. Not necessarily that say the roots are exuding a chemical. It could be that the leaf litter is changing soil chemistry. It can also deposit a leaf litter layer that smothers competing plants, right? Um, and if I remember right, don't quote me on this, but it's been a minute since I combed through um, our Peterkin and Lloyd here to look at litter effects, but that this is like our Bible for holly ecology. Is this paper about holly in the British Isles from 1967, I think. Anyways, I think they discuss litter effects in here, but yeah. So long story short, I'm not aware of there hasn't been a study that I'm aware of that really gets to the bottom of the
Okay.
mechanisms.
Okay. Next question. This is kind of interesting. Do copper nails work to control?
Never tried it. Another citizen science project.
There you go.
I suspect no, but you know what? Prove me wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Given its tenacity, as you say, I would be a little
It's very
surprised, but
tenacious.
boy, that would be a cool solution if it worked. So, this is kind of an interesting question, a little different angle. You mentioned holly's significance culturally and economically. Do you think
Yeah.
this is a major long-term barrier to mitigation? Have there been
No.
any regulations to holly farming to limit its impact?
Uh, you know, regulations to limit holly farming's impact. Uh, Not that I'm aware of. If yeah, I mean, the listing holly was listed as a Class C. Finally, better late than never, I guess. This year, a lot of people worked hard on that. Um, um, but Class C listing does not limit it does not limit farming. A plant has to be on the quarantine list, as far as I understand, to limit sale. Um, so so no, but I think that something that was kind of remarkable about that whole process was that um, the and I think those articles that have covered it, there's several. There's one, the one from High Country News. There was one in the Washington Plant Society from 2022 that covered the failed attempt to list it back in 2022. Um, is that pretty much people the issue of holly and its invasiveness, the board was behind the ball as far as listing it. Like, people consider it invasive and a problem, you know and so I think that that kind of limits its planting and whatnot. If I recall right, I think somebody wrote down somewhere that there is a reduction in use of the plant, because it is quite widely considered to be an issue at this point. But there isn't, basically, I'm not aware of any laws that are putting limits on holly growing.
No. Okay. I'm going to pose one last question to you and then open it up, see if anybody wants to ask any questions live or share any anecdotes from their own woodlands. And I think, yeah, this is another really interesting question I hadn't really thought about, but how persistent are the seeds? Do they live in the soil for decades like Scotch broom?
Oh, you know what? I bet you I off the top of the head, I don't know. And there's a lot of predation. Um, but I might be able to look up an answer, at least from the biological profile here that I have in front of me, while other questions come in. So let
There you
me
go.
let me
Yeah,
come
well, yeah,
back to
thank you
that.
for that. How about we open it up? I always like getting anecdotes from folks. So, yeah, if anybody has any personal experience, either observing the holly spread in their forest or your own control methods, what are you doing to go to battle with holly in your own woods? Feel free to unmute yourselves and and share that, or if you also have another question for
Yeah, we
Elliott.
can thank him for bringing it up.
Hi.
Joni.
Oh, go ahead, Jen.
Hi, Kirk. Yeah, we first started looking at holly on our place after you mentioned it on a Fireside Chat. And so we started seeing it around and we started going after some of it. And it was like, okay, here's some, here's some, here's some. And it was like 3 days later or 4 days later, we got this little patch taken care of. So it ended up, now we see it everywhere, just like you're saying. We just really watch it and we'll flag it when we see it. So if we don't get it right, then we'll come back to it later.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I recommend people put a GPS point where that holly is.
Yeah,
so
I do
make sure
that
you
too.
get back to it. Rhonda, see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Chad has had success taking a hand drill, uh, drilling holes all around the trunk that are diagonal and pointed down, and then injecting with a little syringe crossbow into those holes. And does it take a few treatments or does it usually work once?
Usually once.
Usually works once.
Remind me what the active chemical in crossbow is. Ellie, do you know what that is?
I do, but I feel like I shouldn't say because here's what I'm going to say: follow all labeled directions.
There you go.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, fair enough. People can look up crossbow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other anecdotes, experiences, questions from the audience? I'll so I, at the risk of sounding dramatic, I've been telling people just based on my experience seeing holly out there, dealing with it within my own family's woods. I've been telling folks that holly is the next Himalayan blackberry, except it's shade tolerant. And I'm not trying to excessively alarm anybody, but given the rate of spread that I've seen over the past 10 years, fast forward 30 years, 40 years, my concern is if we don't control holly, we're going to start seeing these, very dominant thickets in the forest that, like Elliott described, are, aggressively suppressing native vegetation. So it might seem, somewhat innocuous right now if you just see one little seedling here or there. But again, given how difficult it is to control its persistence in the shade and how rapidly it spreads, again, I really encourage everybody to make that a part of your active monitoring, looking for holly, again, putting a GPS point on where you find it so you can come back to it, and then using any one of the control strategies that Elliott just mentioned. Dave Stokes, I see your hand up.
Yeah, hi. I'm working with Elliott since
Hey,
really
Dave.
we started this project, and I really appreciated that presentation, Elliott. That was great. One thing that I wanted to emphasize, though, just in line with what you're saying right now, Kurt, and one reason why it's really so tragic that the Weed Control Board didn't act back in 2010 is that that first study we did, and I won't go into the methods, but it allowed us to calculate the rate of spread of the disease, both in terms of the disease of the plant, both in terms of area and numbers. And it was we were surprised. It was very alarming. We calculated doubling time of 6 to 7 years in terms of numbers and 5 to 6 years in terms of area covered. So it's really something that's happening rapidly. And so I can't emphasize enough the need to control it, especially because, as Elliott said, it gets harder and harder to control the bigger it gets. You can't just pull it up when it gets very big.
And again, it's not very big before you can't pull it out easily. It's smaller than you might imagine before you reach that point.
Fern, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you very much. Have a question, comment, and a note of thanks. First, for Elliott, I want to ask, when you did your research in pack forests, when it came to like the harvest like the forestry operations with the harvest itself and after planting occurred, did you notice with the exponential growth of holly if they were out competing the planted species within these harvest units?
In my data, I didn't have an exponential curve. But setting that aside, um, they weren't. I think the interesting thing about it was that they weren't, and I didn't get data that directly addressed whether they were out competing or not, as this is just visual observation,
Yeah.
is that they were holding their own with everything else there. And I think that is something to note about holly that I didn't mention earlier. You know, is it'll establish, I think because of its shade tolerance, it'll establish and grow up and through some pretty dense stuff from what I've seen.
Mhm.
Right. So it's just a testament to its ability to colonize a variety of sites with a variety of levels of competition,
Mhm.
So that's really all I can say to that. It's definitely more dense and prickly out there. Those are my more miserable sample areas.
Yeah, thank you, Elliot. Yeah, I appreciate it. And then when it comes to now to like the comment portion, in my volunteer and paid work, I found that when it comes to like smaller hollies, about 5 feet and under, you can manually remove them via hand pulling, using a weed wrench, or you can even utilize a small winch to pull them out of the ground. Once they become too large for manual or mechanical removal, then using the easy eject lance, like Elliot was sharing, is the best mode of operation to mitigate the impacts of the herbicide to the ecosystem beyond the plant itself. And then lastly, thank you, Elliot, for the presentation. It was excellent. Found your article very insightful and a step in the right direction when it comes to holly management. Thank you.
Thanks, Fern.
Yeah, and I want to mention to folks, if you look in the chat, whatever it's called, area there, I posted 2 articles that Elliot made me aware of. One of them is from High Country News, and the other one is on the University of Washington website. And really interesting kind of summaries of holly's presence and impacts in the Northwest. Rhonda, I see your hand up. I'm not sure if that's
I put it back up. Yeah, I put it back up. I just wanted to say that crossbow has 2 things in it. One is triclopyr, and then the other is butoxyethyl ester.
Okay, yeah, the triclopyr I think is what that's what I was curious about. Elliot mentioned imazapyr is in the little easy eject cartridges. So
You can be careful because you can get the easy ejects with Roundup or glyphosate. It's nowhere near as effective. Imazapyr is very effective. You apply it during certain times of year. It's usually when there's translocation happening, either up or down. So spring and fall, very high success rate.
I have another question. Sorry, Kirk.
yeah, go ahead.
Those Easy Jets, I did look them up a while back and they were extremely expensive.
Yes, unfortunately, but you gotta, I mean, yes. And that's why it's something we're stuck with. That's one of the reasons, right? But if you're comparing it to the other methods, if you're looking at what the cost is to control per control for the amount of plants, it is the most efficient one, as expensive as it is at the outset. Because of its success rate, because of the ease of treating with it and the amount of time it takes to treat a plant or a tree with it. So, but the barrier to entry is high for sure.
Reading that High Country News article, I forget the fellow's name, but they were basically
Munster, I think,
following somebody along, and he was taking those 22 cartridges that normally you put in with the Easy Eject lance and tapping them in with a hammer
I don't condone that.
Okay.
Mustin. Why did I say Munster? I think it's the Halloween Nightmare Before Christmas.
So not recommended then, not not for the layperson.
You shouldn't do that. Okay. All right.
Right.
Can I ask Dave real quick if he remembers? Because there was another student we were working with who was trying to do something about seed predation. I don't know if he recalls anything about seed viability. I see someone in the chat looked it up and they got a Google AI answer. I was just wondering if Dave has.
Well,
Yeah.
the readings I've found indicate a few years, so it's not like Scotch broom. But the other thing that's going on with holly seeds that we observed, my students observed, was that a lot of them get eaten by rodents, destroyed. So it's not just the length of time the seed would be viable under ideal conditions. There's a lot of predation going on out there as well.
Fern, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to add a comment when it comes to the easy eject lance and its cost prohibitive nature. I know that when it comes to conservation districts, you may have the opportunity to reach out to your local one and possibly like rent or borrow an easy eject lance to use on your property. You can also look at a local tool library near you as well, but you may need to purchase the cartridges themselves, but the tool itself may be available if you reach out.
Well, I'll share one control strategy that I would not recommend, and this is based on personal experience, and it looks like Elliott's ready for his experiment.
Yeah, go ahead, Kirk.
15 years ago on my family's Oakville land, we had a large holly. It was probably about 3 inches in diameter, and this is before I knew any better. And I just, cut it down, moved on, forgot about it. And when I came back several years later, I don't recall how long, maybe 3 or 5 years later, apparently the root system of that original holly had suckered tremendously, and now, or at that time then, there's about a 12-foot circle of holly erupting from the ground. So what was once a single-stemmed holly now literally was a thicket. And I've been back in there with my brush cutter just mowing and mowing and mowing and mowing. So definitely exacerbated the situation. So either don't do that, or if you are going to cut it manually, and I think Elliott already mentioned this, you have to be persistent in continuing to cut and cut and cut, I assume, until you exhaust the carbohydrate reserves in the roots and it finally gives up.
Yeah, I think it's only really an option for, like, say you have one tree in your front yard and you don't want it anymore. Like if you're doing forest management and you have multiple hollies, forget it. I agree.
Well, Elliott, this is the longest that this number of people have stuck around in a fireside chat.
Oh, really?
I think that's
maybe because they want to see me. Maybe because they want to see me throw this on the fire. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll pitch this on, and we'll let anyone.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
This?
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have time. I have a few comments and a couple questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm on the phone. Yeah. Thank you. I've been observing holly for several decades and trying to control it now for, 5 years. And a couple things. One is copper nails do not work. That was tried here, didn't work. Second, I had a single holly tree that I cut and then kept at year by year. Also did everything I could to the stump to try to get it to rot. And it was 8 years before that thing got the dust, including, basically trying to kick it or hit it with a sledgehammer to get it to pop out.
Wow.
So, just incredibly tenacious. Also, cut a big one down this summer and have been burning the wood, and the wood just burns great. Now it was sitting for a couple of months, but it's amazing how well
Let me tell
that
you,
grows.
this is burning. This is definitely burning, and I cut it down yesterday. So,
Yeah, that's incredible. Incredible.
look, I've got a sparkler here. This is holly. Look at this.
Green holly, fresh.
This is green. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. I cut this down yesterday. Well, what's your name, sir?
Yeah, my name's Ed Chad, and
Ed.
we've got residences both on the Olympic Peninsula and Whidbey Island, and
okay.
I've been authorized to apply triclopyr. Don't have the easy eject lance, but I've had very good success with just cutting the stumps and then painting it with a paintbrush. So it really limits the spread of it. The only thing I found is that you want to leave enough that you could recut it the next season if it didn't work.
Right.
But you don't want to leave too much. So what I found is that if I leave even a foot of a stump, then that's too much. It's got too much energy in it, and it comes back. Couple questions if you have time.
Yeah. Kirk, do we have time?
Well, folks are welcome to leave whenever they want at this point. But yeah, also happy to linger longer, long as you are, Elliott.
Well, and I have witnesses, right? No, that's burning. So not surprising. Sorry, just to butt in real quick. Not surprising. I guess. I mean, did this when I cut it down in the summertime. I burned it I think the same day I cut it green, right? So I guess there's some truth to the whole. I guess there's some truth to the holly being flammable even when green. So, anyways, okay, back to you, Ed.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously that says something about the structure or the chemistry of the holly tree that makes it really unusual in that way. That's certainly of concern. But a couple things what I'm wondering about. One is I've been trying to control an area of about 10 acres that's got invaded by holly trees. And one thing for sure is that the seeds are spread by birds, and I can absolutely testify to that.
There's a good paper on that
my property. Too. Yeah, and so thousands of seedlings can be spread by birds, particularly on a snowy day. The robins will go in and just chomp it down, and then go poop all over the place. And they, like to poop just like we do in private, so. They those little seedlings like to come up in really sneaky places. I've been trying to control this area of about 10 acres, and I thought I was doing a pretty good job of sort of zeroing in on the centralized part. And then this fall came upon an area that I had missed that had, oh my God, a lot of big stems, a lot of them bearing females. And I didn't have any. Sometimes if the access is okay, I can try to cut a female tree down in a way that I collect most of the seeds. This time I just couldn't do it, so I just made these big piles. And sounds like, according to what you're saying, it could be that that a lot of that will go away. But is there any experience anybody has of just a big old pile of female holly branches cut down, and sort of what the impact of that might be on spread?
So the only thing I can really, like, you're composting it basically on site? and there's berries on it.
Yeah, that was kind of the only option I had, was to just try to make a big pile.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would imagine the seeds would remain palatable for a certain amount of time, and viable for a certain amount of time. So, but that's something I can't really speak to. Like, I'm not aware of data that looks at that question specifically, right? So I think if you wanted to be safe, you would. Looks like you could just throw them in the fire.
You see that,
Yeah,
Scott,
and the problem being,
I want to get a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Scott,
Good luck, Ed.
well,
Yeah.
I did want to ask though about. I'm sorry, just did want to ask about.
Can we,
funding,
Scott? Do you want
sources?
to circle back to the end of the line, maybe? And we'll get the other two folks, and then I'll come back to you. How about that?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, Scott.
Yeah, I just came upon a small grove of them. They're 10, 12 feet tall and lots of runners. So I assume that something in the past has gotten cut down. There's probably 6, 8, 10 that are 12 feet tall. Does each one need and I'm assuming they're all linked under the ground.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And then there's lots of short ones, like 2, 3 feet tall.
Yes.
Does each stem need to be injected?
Okay, do you see, so you can't, I'm assuming that you can't see, if it is connected underground, you can't, well, you said underground, you can't see the connecting piece, right? It would be underground if it's there.
I haven't rooted through to see yet.
Well, it's not above ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would hit each stem, and here's why. And this is actually another remarkable thing about holly, is its layering ability. But I would expect, here's what I would expect, is that there would be a certain degree of compartmentalization that would happen if you just hit one of those. At a certain point, I think that the others along that line, even if they are connected underground, they would be able to compartmentalize that and seal it off. And I think you would be justified in hitting each stem above ground. Again, check the label, but I think you would be fine. And that's I wouldn't expect it to die completely unless you did. Interesting thing about holly, related to its tenacity, excuse me, it can get crushed. Like, I've come across trees in the woods. They get crushed by fallen trees. They get pinned down, and now every branch that's in contact with the soil is rooting and creating a new tree, right? It's still connected to the parent tree, but it has its own root system. So now if something happens to the parent tree, that branch will continue on its own, right? So in that situation, yeah, I would treat it. It might have been a tree that was laid down. It could be vegetatively connected underground. I would be looking at treating each stem if it wasn't against the label, but I don't think it is off the top of my head.
Okay, and then on individual plants that I find that I can dig up, how much do I need to follow every single root out to its end to
do the best you can?
Yeah. And then where do I put the this plant that I've just dug up?
If you can set it where it'll dry out and it's not in contact with the soil, it should die. If it's in contact with the soil, especially if it's during the wet season here, I wouldn't be surprised if it roots. So if you want to be sure, if it's, if you want to kill it like in the Terminator, you would put it up on something where it'll dry out and it won't come back.
Yeah, I've been hanging them from branches, trying to warn
Perfect.
other hollies to just keep moving.
Yeah,
We'll
it's
see if
actually
they
something I
heed the
do whenever
warning.
I pull up the small holly in my woods that I can actually get out with my by hand.
By
I'll
hand.
find some branches that to hang it from, so the roots desiccate, and
Morbid.
kind of an odd way of decorating my woods. But
Yeah,
anybody else have any
Okay.
other questions or
Thank you.
anecdotes? Otherwise, I think we'll look to wrap this up. I see. Esther.
Well, I was going to ask about funding sources for private landowners. Is there any
I would,
chance of getting funding for like a WCC crew when you've got a big infestation?
I don't know, but the people I would ask to point you in the right direction would be your conservation districts and your county weed boards.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the input. Esther, there was a question from Esther Kirk.
Yep. Looks like she may have just logged off there.
Scott, did Scott have a follow-up, or is his hand still raised?
Nope.
Okay, I do want to say real quick that my younger brother was a student at UW at the same time as me for a little bit, for a little while, and he actually worked in the same lab, and he found my box of holly samples, and he wrote firewood on it, and so this is kind of it's come full circle tonight, I think. I don't know if he's on the call, but classic little brother move. Luckily, it still have him, but anyways.
In my defense, I'd like to say I actually delivered your holly samples, and I had to ride with them on my skateboard for a couple miles to get them there. So
Thanks, Tim.
I think we're even.
Tim processes all the water. If you live in Seattle, Tim processes half your water. So,
well, I think that's a great note to close on. Hey, Elliott, I really appreciate you hanging out with us and sharing what you know. That was super informative.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Sorry for the rocky start. It's just I've had it with computers, but it was a great time. Everybody, and I appreciate you inviting me. Yeah, right.
All good.
All right.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. We will see you in January. Have a happy holidays, happy New Year, and look forward to seeing you at the next Fireside Chat. Good night, y'all.